We have to have that attitude. And it's with that in mind that I announce with sincere pleasure that I really like and respect Anna Kasparian, and not because both of us have total contempt for the lunatic running Israel right now, Bibi Netanyahu, but because I sincerely think that Anna Kasparian, while she disagrees with me, I'm sure, on a million issues, is motivated by a desire to figure out what is best for the country that we live in. It's not about Israel at all. Sorry, Mark Levin. It's about us. And I think Anna Kasparian really cares about the United States. And so with that in mind, I'm just very happy to introduce her now. Anna, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Tucker. I appreciate it.
I'm worried about where this is going. I'm worried about all the Nazi talk, not just because it's directed at me and you, but because once you start talking like that, it's kind of hard to walk it back, and it's kind of hard to disapprove of violence when the people you're calling Hitler get killed. Like, how could you be sad when Hitler dies? So where are we going, and how do we stop the introduction of like Nazi, Hitler, fascist into our conversation? We need to pull back on that, I think.
Well, obviously you're right about that. There's no question. And I think what you're also correct about is the fact that these words are specifically being used in a way to intimidate people and persuade them to avoid speaking out against what they find to be a huge problem in our country's priorities right now. And what I would like to say to anyone who's been smeared as an anti-Semite when they don't have any hatred in their hearts at all for the Jewish people is don't let them win when they do that to you. Because you know in your heart you're not an anti-Semite. You know in your heart that you're not a Nazi. The people closest to you in your life know that. And so you as an American have every right in the world to be critical of the fact that regardless of which presidential administration we're talking about, our priorities are messed up, and there isn't enough focus on all the various aspects of American society that are completely falling apart right now as we speak. You know, there's been political violence in this country. I'm going to put my cards on the table and say, you know, I've been guilty of using inflammatory rhetoric, certainly. But I think what you're saying here is important, especially as it pertains to how Americans communicate with one another about these incredibly controversial issues. I get that people get passionate, but you have to understand the motivations of the person who's trying to smear you, number one. Number two, if you are met with this type of rhetoric from a fellow American, you're so right. Do not become what you claim to hate. Don't become hateful yourself. I allowed that to happen to me to some extent during Trump's first term. I have a lot of remorse about that because I think there are a lot of really great people in this country. They voted for Trump. Turns out I don't care. It doesn't matter who they voted for. It doesn't say anything about who they are as people. And more importantly, they're my fellow Americans who have participated in what makes this country great, which is our ability to voice our support and cast our ballot for who we feel is best to represent us. So I just think there's something kind of interesting happening in the country right now that gives me a little bit of optimism, gives me a little bit of hope. People are starting to see beyond partisanship and instead kind of understand, okay, wait a minute, we're all Americans. It feels like a lot of the framing around partisan divides is completely manufactured and in fact is utilized by members of the media to divide us and to distract us from the fact that our government is not focused on taking care of us. And so I just really want to drive that point home. Don't fall for the gross rhetoric. Don't partake in it, and try to see the humanity in everyone before you allow yourself to devolve into the very thing that you hate. Now, I will say it's really hard for me to practice that when it comes to members of the IDF and Netanyahu in particular. But I think your message is the correct message.
So I saw this. I've been brooding about this for the last couple of days because I am worried that the violence will accelerate. And I've been in countries where this happens. It gets to a certain point, and you know your cousin gets killed, and at that point you can't think clearly, and you get swept up in it. That is a very familiar cycle to anyone who's seen it. So the only way to stop that is by controlling our own behavior and by being honest about it. And as I was thinking about this, I saw that you apologized to someone publicly for something that you had said about him. And I just, it was weird that we were having the same thoughts at the same time. But can you explain that?
Sure. So about 5 years ago, Aaron Mate, who is a journalist and is actually doing a lot of really great work, especially in his coverage of what's happening in Gaza, had reported some things that I disagreed with in regard to what was happening in Syria, right? So he didn't deny that Bashar al-Assad had in some instances used chemical weapons, but there was one particular instance that he was denying, and I disagreed with him on that. Who's right, who's wrong, that doesn't even matter at this point. I don't even know why I allowed that one minor disagreement to basically whip me up into this crazy frenzy and this
been there, baby.
Right?
Yes.
Where all of a sudden I'm like, no, Aaron Mate, definitely, he's getting funded by the Russians. Definitely funded by the Russians. And so on TYT one day, Cenk and I were discussing Syria, and I just blurted that out. And I was in a different headspace at that time. I'd like to think that I've matured a little bit since then. And I just kept doubling down. I wouldn't apologize. There were some circumstantial things that I would point to, but really nothing solid to prove that Aaron Mate is funded by the Russians. And so over the last year in particular, I just kept seeing his posts on X. I actually was on a panel with him on Piers Morgan's show, and he and I were very much on the same page in regard to the topic we were discussing. And every single time he would come up in my mind, I've just felt really bad about myself because I smeared him and I never apologized, and that's not okay. And so I came across another one of his posts today that I liked on X, and I was like, you know what? Now is the time. It's been 5 years. It's embarrassing that it's been 5 years. Now is the time for me to practice what I preach, to lead by example and apologize to him unequivocally. And I was met with grace. He was very, very kind, and he accepted my apology, and I'm very grateful for that. But there's another point I want to just quickly make about this. If you are in the media, understand, like, we are all flawed, and you're right, Tucker, we all do change, some for the better, some for the worse. It is okay to admit when you're wrong. It is okay to apologize. It doesn't make you, I don't know, a less credible person if you admit you were wrong. And so just something to keep in mind if you happen to be in the media and you've made a mistake, or you've accidentally smeared someone, or you intentionally smeared someone and then realized it was wrong, just apologize and move on.
I just think that's such a beautiful story that you just told, and really at the heart of everything I care about. And I'm wondering, why do you think you're because we talk for a living, you've talked for a living for 20 years, something like that. That's every day, always talking on camera. But this followed you for 5 years. I just think it's so interesting that it kept coming back to you. Why do you think that is? And how did you feel after you said that in public today?
At first, I felt scared after I said that in public because, sometimes you're met with people who, even though they're not the ones who got smeared, they're not the ones receiving the apology, they won't accept it, and they just keep doubling down on how you're a terrible person. And that's fine. That's fair. But to my surprise, a lot of people were really happy to see that because it's so rare these days, especially on social media. And look, especially over the last, I would say, 3.5 years, I've just personally realized something, which was, okay, what is my identity? Like, am I just Armenian, right? And I love my Armenian heritage, absolutely love it. But I was born and raised in America, and I love this country. And if you do love this country, engaging in divisive garbage that just tears this country apart, that makes Americans turn on one another, is really not the way to go. And so I just made a decision at some point that I'm not going to engage in that. And the only time that I will allow myself a little more freedom in my rhetoric is when I'm referring to a foreign country that is harming us. Okay?
Yes.
So in the case of the United States, in the case of my fellow Americans, in the case of people I disagree with politically, let's have that conversation. It's okay if it gets fiery. I'm known to get very passionate. But I hope that the message I'm sending is that, again, I see the humanity in the person I'm disagreeing with first and foremost, and that once the debate is over, there's no engaging in the dehumanizing, disgusting rhetoric that Mark Levin honestly has been spewing for many, many years. And now it's being directed toward you because you had the audacity to criticize the foreign country that he seems to care far more about than our own. That's the way I see it. And I knew this was going to happen, Tucker. They were waiting for something to pin on you outside of your evidence-based critique of what's happening in this U.S.-Israel alliance. And in fact, I had a conversation about this with someone close to me. So someone told me, look, everything that you've been saying about what's happening in Gaza and what Israel's been up to is backed up by evidence, right? So they can't really come after you for that. But what they will do is find you in a moment of weakness where you make a mistake and they'll destroy you. So be careful because they're watching.
That's correct.
Well, that moment never happened, or it hasn't happened yet. But what I have noticed is they can just take you out of context, which has happened.
Yeah.
And as a result, I was met with violence in my own neighborhood by someone who is absolutely convinced that I'm a Jew hater, which of course I'm not. So that's the kind of situation we're dealing with right now. And it's scary, but the only thing you can do is really control your own behavior. You can't control the behavior of others. And I'm hoping that if we lead by example, we can get this country to a better place.
So let me just say, I've been denounced as America's most dangerous anti-Semite. No one ever provides a single
That's crazy.
example of me being anti-Semitic because I'm not. And if I was, I guess I'd probably just say so. I just say my views as plainly as I can, and I abhor anti-Semitism. I've always thought that. I've always said that. So there's it's a lie. But I'm interested, I'm not afraid at all. However, I understand that this is an incitement to violence. It clearly is. It's intentional. They approve of violence. They love what's happening in Gaza. I don't need more evidence. They love violence. They don't consider their opponents fully human. So tell me what happened. You said that these slanders provoked violence against you?
Yes. So there are these weird, dark, shadowy organizations. We don't know how they're funded. Some of them, we don't even know who's behind them. But, one of them is Canary Mission. There's another group called Stop Anti-Semitism. I think there's more information about who's behind that group. And then there's another group called Jews in School. And so these groups realized that they can't get me fired from my job, right? Cenk Uygur is not going to fire me because of my critique of Israel. So they instead decided to start attacking my husband, and they're trying to get him fired from his job, even though this is like the most apolitical guy. When I met him, I'm like, oh, are you into news and politics? He's like, no. I'm like, oh, what are you into? Sports. that was it. I'm like, you're perfect for me.
Good husband. I agree. It's
right,
good.
Right. And, they've been relentless in taking me out of context. And sure enough, one morning as I was walking my dog, a woman who I've actually seen in the neighborhood before, we had never spoken to each other, but, we've passed by one another without incident. She's standing in the middle of the sidewalk, just kind of blocking it, and her dog is going nuts. And she's looking at me with this weird, menacing look on her face. And I'm really not thinking much of it. I'm thinking, oh, that face is probably because of the fact that her dog is losing its mind. She's probably trying to train the dog. No big deal. I literally try to get around her because she's blocking the sidewalk, and I walk into the street. And as I'm doing that, she starts approaching me with her dog, like basically sicking her dog at me and my dog, which is like a little 20-pound dog, mine is. And at that point, I take my headphones out. I'm listening to music. I'm like, hey, what are you doing? And she's like, you're a Jew hater. I'm like, oh my gosh, she's actually trying to hurt me with her dog. And at that point, I try to reason with her at first. I'm like, no, there's a misunderstanding. And she's like screaming at the top of her lungs. And to be honest with you, at that point, I was just like, okay, I'm critical of a foreign country that is currently killing tens of thousands of children. So let me ask you, how many children need to be slaughtered for you to be satisfied? And at that point, like, her dog's still going nuts. And I realize, okay, it's stupid for me to keep standing here. I'm going to get my dog to safety. And as I'm walking away from her, she utters, "Good luck to your husband dealing with you." And I was like, my husband loves me. And her response to that is, "That's why we're trying to get him fired," which told me that she's basically part of an organized group that's trying to destroy my life because I'm critical of Israel.
Yeah.
And so I am smart enough to understand that it is stupid to conflate people like this with the entire Jewish population. I will never let these people win and turn me into an anti-Semite, ever, ever, ever.
Amen. I
My
agree.
absolute best friend from high school, she's my sister. I love her. She's Jewish. I go to Passover Seder with her. It's ridiculous to just go around smearing people. But here's what I will say. This type of behavior is exactly what leads to anti-Semitism.
Yes.
Because if people feel like they're being targeted like this, if people feel like there's a group of people that's trying to destroy their lives, their livelihoods, make sure that they end up out on the streets with nothing, I mean, what do you think that inspires in people's hearts? Anger, rage, hatred. You know, Barry Weiss just interviewed Senator John Fetterman and asked, like, oh, why do you think there's this rise in anti-Semitism? It's the social media platforms. It's the algorithms. How could they do this? No, Barry, we keep seeing children slaughtered. And guess what? Americans don't like that. How about stop slaughtering the children? And this issue that you're, fired up about might actually calm down a little bit. But they just don't get it because they think that Israel is entitled to doing what it's doing. And I disagree.
Yeah, and I don't think that I should be required to pay for it or denounced as a Nazi. But it's interesting and very distressing to me, since I spent my whole life on the right, whatever that is. I'm beginning to ask, what is that exactly? But I thought that one of the pillars of non-liberal thought, one of the main reasons Trump got elected last November, was because we on the right are opposed to censorship. And I sincerely am on the deepest level. I would never submit to that under any circumstances, because I think it's the thing that separates the free from the enslaved. If you're free, you can't tell me what to think or say, period. And of course, it's the most American of all values. So I thought that was a sacrosanct principle and that it would never be violated by anyone. And we can disagree, but like, you could never try to prevent me from saying it. And I wake up and maybe I just missed this. I didn't know this. All of a sudden, everybody I know, Barry Weiss and that creepy guy from the Babylon Bee and, all these people, it turns out like they spend all day thinking about how to prevent other people from talking and working to prevent other people from talking. Barry Weiss is at the top of that list. Here's a media executive, the head of CBS News, whose real interest is imposing censorship on the country on behalf of another country. I don't know, does that shock you, or maybe I'm just too naive? I did not see that coming at all.
Yeah, you're a little bit naive. So I did see it coming.
I think I am. I agree.
Because the truth is, there are very few people who are sincere in wanting to protect free speech. Because as soon as there is speech that offends their sensibilities, all of a sudden they're not in favor of protecting free speech. So protecting speech matters the most when you are hearing speech you dislike.
Yes.
Because you have to think about how wanting to censor people who are engaged in rhetoric you don't like is definitely going to come back around to you. And, as someone who has been on the left for most of my adult life, right, I remember thinking to myself, for all the people on the left who are like hell-bent on engaging in censorship, do you guys understand history? Do you know how this is going to work out for you if you keep engaging like this? And so I just think that what's particularly gross about what's happening in this current moment is that the censorship has to do with speech that is critical of a foreign country.
That's right.
And that's unacceptable. Okay, it's unacceptable. We are able to be as critical as we want of our own government, which should also be protected, obviously. But the idea that, the other thing I want to just quickly say, I know this is a little bit of a tangent, but I have to get this out. Ahmed al-Shara playing basketball with members of our military in the United States White House on U.S. soil. Okay, a so-called former Al-Qaeda terrorist visiting New York City for the UN General Assembly is such an insult to the American people. Unacceptable. So while you have the Mark Levins and people like him constantly defaming people as jihadists, Islamists, terrorists, hey, you got any word about al-Shara cozying up to the Trump administration? Are we okay with that? Oh, he doesn't like Hezbollah. Okay, so I guess he's our ally because he doesn't like Hezbollah. It's just disgusting how much our government, again, regardless of which administration we're talking about, I mean, the Biden administration probably would have done the same thing, to be honest with you, right? And it's just sick to me that all of a sudden, actual terrorism, the terrorism that took out thousands of our own people and ended up dragging us into lengthy wars in the Middle East that killed more of our soldiers and tons of innocent civilians, by the way. That's okay. We're just going to forget about that. We're going to wipe the slate clean because this Al-Qaeda terrorist doesn't like Hezbollah and is good for Israel. It's insane. It's absolutely insane.
Well, and the irony is,
I really want to get that out.
The irony, no, and I'm so glad you said that. I mean, it raises a lot of questions about 9/11, by the way. I was told that Al-Qaeda did 9/11 and killed 3,000 Americans. And I spent 20 years adjusting my life accordingly and covering all this nonsense around the world and really believing that. So if that's true, how do we have an Al-Qaeda leader playing basketball with American servicemen? A. B, I was also told that, the Arab countries are the problem, right? So I happen to be in an Arab country with, well-connected people in that country, people who run that country, the day that Assad landed in Moscow and this character took over Syria. And I just happened to be there. So I asked, who is this guy? And their instinct was, this is bad. This guy's like a jihadi. He's a radical. They hate the jihadis, by the way, the leaders of prosperous Arab countries, probably of all Arab countries, because they're a threat to them. So they really don't like Islamists. I'm sorry, Mark Levin, who I don't think has ever traveled outside our borders, but that's just a fact. And they were very wary of this guy, extremely wary of him and bothered by the whole thing. And they understood that it was Turkey and Israel that did this, of course, and for their own ends. But they didn't like this guy. They thought he was too dirty. And then so to see him now celebrated at the White House, it's like, okay, so let's talk about 9/11 again. What was that? Did that evoke those questions in your mind?
I mean, absolutely. But Tucker, I'm the bad guy because I acknowledged FBI files that detailed the so-called dancing Israelis. Okay, I'm the bad guy. But
why is that bad? Why is that bad to have if you arrest foreigners on your soil for celebrating the biggest terror attack in your history? Why are you the criminal for just pointing that out?
Well, because they were Israelis, of course.
Oh, okay.
It's that simple. It's that simple. If they were, let's just be honest here. If the individuals who were arrested that day weren't Israeli and were instead, let's say, Lebanese or Syrian or anything else, it wouldn't be controversial to talk about that. In fact, you would be encouraged to talk about that. And so it's just the whole thing is sick because I was in high school when 9/11 happened. So I remember what America was like prior to 9/11. 9/11 crushed this country.
Yes.
9/11 convinced Americans to give some of their civil liberties away to our federal government in the name of national security. 9/11 encouraged the United States to go to the Middle East and engage in wars that we should not have engaged in, especially Iraq. And it hasn't ended since then. 9/11 is what persuaded the American people that it was a good idea to go into debt in order to fight these wars. We had an economic surplus in the beginning of the Bush administration. We are now drowning in federal debt, $38 trillion. It's getting worse every single year. And just to go back to what you said about Ben Shapiro, he and I were debating on a CNN panel where the topic of Social Security came up again, and he just kept talking about how Social Security is bankrupting this country. When I challenged him by mentioning the trillions of dollars the United States has spent on, yes, supporting Israel through, military aid, but also other things like bribing Egypt to play nice with Israel, and the trillions of dollars that we have fought in wars on behalf of Israel. You don't think that that's crushing our economy a little bit? You don't think that's contributed to our debt far more than our Social Security system, which I will admit, there is a funding issue there, but Americans have paid into that system. Americans are entitled to that system.
Right.
Okay. They weren't handed that money. That money is the result of their hard work and their contributions to that program. What has Israel contributed to the United States? And why are they entitled to us literally taking out loans, like going into debt just to hand them more money? It's insane. $30 billion since October 7th has been funneled from the United States to Israel for them to carry out what I believe are atrocities in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Yemen. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Name a country they haven't bombed. So I just think that it's important to have these conversations. And I understand that people like Mark Levin will get very irritated by it, will get very offended by it because, he can't respond to it effectively or substantively. You can't defend the indefensible. The only thing you can try to do is shut people up. But some people can't be silenced. I'm one of them. You're another one of them. And they can go ahead and smear us all they want. But, when it comes to the marketplace of ideas, I think Americans have spoken in regard to who they agree with the most on this matter. And it's because they have felt the economic ramifications of the U.S. alliance with Israel.
I don't see how this particular set of beliefs wins any election. So if you only care about serving a foreign power, an irrelevant foreign power, you're not getting anything in return for it, and you don't care at all about the condition of your own country, I just don't see a market for that. I mean, I disagree with it. Of course, I'm repulsed by it, of course, but as a sort of matter of democratic principle, I don't see how you get to 51% in an election with that. I just don't think that has a future at all. I think most people look at that and are like, no. So why wouldn't there be some convergence from either side, all sides? Why wouldn't you have like a true, let's just argue about what to do to help America party? Like, isn't that inevitable?
I feel like that's in some regard forming already. The two-party system, I don't think bodes well for the American populace. I think what actually makes a lot more sense is maybe don't fully disregard labels if that's something that you're into. You want to think about labels. But consider that there are areas of agreement, actually vast areas of agreement, yes, between the two sides, especially as it pertains to foreign policy, especially at this current moment. So the idea that I wouldn't be willing to align myself with someone on the right who I might have a ton of other disagreements with, but we have the agreement on, hey, we need to find a way to organize and get our federal government to prioritize us. I'm going to work with people who agree with me on that. I don't care where they land on the political spectrum,
agree. And if they're willing to admit fault in public in a sincere way, anyone who will do that is an ally of mine. Whether they regard me as an ally is another question, but I regard anyone willing to do that as an ally, both for moral reasons, it's my religion, but also for practical reasons. The only reason that we ineffectively bombed the nuclear sites in Iran is because no one ever acknowledged that Iraq was a mistake, Libya was a mistake, Afghanistan, the 20-year occupation, was a mistake. Having nothing to do with how we withdrew, we shouldn't have been there for 20 years. It was all a mistake, and nobody ever admitted it, much less took responsibility, much less accepted punishment or sanction for it. And if you don't do that, it doesn't get better. It just gets worse.
Well, what's amazing is how quickly people not only forget about all the lies that were told to the American people to manufacture consent to get us into that war, that preemptive war in Iraq, even people who remember for some reason, allow themselves to be propagandized into believing that Iran is a real threat to America.
Right.
And if Iran was really a threat to America, I don't think they would hit the US government up and let us know, hey, just to save face with our population, since you attacked us and our nuclear sites, we're going to drop a few missiles in this area near a US airbase, but we want you to evacuate all your soldiers because we don't want anyone to get killed. Yeah, real threat to the United States. Okay. In reality, Iran is a threat. Iran is a threat to Israel. There's no question about that.
Yes.
Because Iran is now the only country left that isn't willing to sit by and allow Israel to engage in an expansionist project that involves slaughter, land theft, and really much of what we've been seeing over the last 2 years.
You said a few minutes ago that you're proud to be Armenian, but that fundamentally you're American. And that suggests to me that the idea of my group versus your group, zero-sum identity politics, you're rejecting that in favor of some more universalist connection to other people. We're all kind of in this together.
Yeah, in favor of America and Americans, absolutely. Because if you know, my brother actually confronted me about this, and I think he made a really good point. It made me start thinking differently. You know, he kind of referred to America devolving into like a commuter country.
Right.
Where people come here and they don't see themselves as Americans. They're born here. They don't see themselves as Americans. They kind of see this as like the land of opportunity. But they think my identity is not an American. My identity is I'm white, I'm Black, I'm Latino, I'm Armenian, whatever. And you kind of like segregate yourself into these like high school like cliques where everyone else is your enemy, right? And it's, you can't be thinking about Americans that way. There has to be something that bonds us together, an identity that brings us together. And that identity is that we are Americans.
Exactly.
We should want to see this country thrive. And I think a lot of people who do immigrate to this country want to see this country thrive. They love this country and they hate what has happened to their country, right? The freedoms that they were not afforded in their country of origin. But make no mistake about it. If you are here and you think, well, I'm just here to reap the benefits of what this country offers, but I don't really care about the American identity or experience, then you don't get it. You just don't get it. I mean, I don't know what else to say.
One of the things that I disagree with Ben Shapiro most strongly on, and I just want to be clear, I don't hate Ben Shapiro at all, and we disagree obviously on the use of force, on Israel strongly, but that doesn't make me emotional. Ben is looking at the world from a completely different perspective, which I reject, but I'm not mad about it. What makes me mad is the way that he describes the United States as like this economic zone, totally divorced from the actual people who live there and their customs and their history and their instincts and their connections to each other and to regions, to physical reality. He has no regard for that at all, in the way that big companies have no regard for that at all. Like, shut up and freeze your eggs and get back to work. And I feel like that's dehumanizing. Doesn't quite describe that attitude. It's an attitude that doesn't see people as human and in the service of what? Making money? I mean, it's everything about that I dislike. I feel like that's never challenged on the right. Increasingly, it's not challenged on the left either. It used to be big time, less and less. But certainly on the right, anyone who challenges it is derided as a socialist. I'm not quite sure what that means. I don't think I'm a socialist. Never have been. But I don't think that we should tell people that they have no right to live in the town where they were born. Like, okay, so who are we serving here? What is the point of this exercise? To maximize profits to you? Like what? I don't know. Like, what is that?
Well, the first thing I thought of as I listened to Ben Shapiro make that argument was, oh, so I shouldn't have the ability to stay close to my family?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, think about what ties you to the community you live in, right? The community you grew up in. It's your family. It's your friends. It's your job. A lot of people aren't able to work remotely. And part of the reason why it's so expensive to live in, some of these cities or the most expensive parts of this country is because whether we like it or not, a lot of the jobs are concentrated there. So I would love nothing more than to live in a part of the country that isn't as overcrowded as LA is, to be honest with you. Like, I want to be in nature. I want a little more of a rural experience, but I don't have that luxury because I do have to work and my job is located here in Los Angeles. And any other media job I want, unless I work for myself, is going to be in a big city like New York. So it's just this really interesting idea. Like, I don't think most Americans are walking around feeling entitled. Like, most Americans aren't thinking to themselves, hey, you know what? I'm a bum and I sit on the couch all day and I don't make any money, but I deserve to live in a multi-million-dollar mansion paid for by the United States government. No, there are countless Americans in this country who work more than 40 hours a week and still can't make ends meet. Something is broken in the system, and putting the onus on Americans and making them out to be lazy bums is what offends me the most, to be honest.
Well, sure. When Ben Shapiro says blaming the system rather than blaming yourself, your own lack of creativity, initiative, intelligence, whatever your problem is immoral. And that is a kind of long-time refrain on the so-called right. And there are things about it that I agree with. I do think you should blame yourself first. I'm trying to force myself to be in the habit of that. I did something wrong. I'm going to admit it. I think that's really important for the sake of preserving your soul. And also, by the way, you get credibility when you're honest about yourself. It's easy to be honest about other people. You're fat, but it's hard to say I'm fat, right? So, like, I agree with it on one level, but it's also just not true. Like, we are subject to forces that we can't control. It's just a fact. I didn't write the tax code, for example. I don't have any control over the hiring standards at various companies or the admission standards at various schools. Those are systemic problems. It's just a fact. They are systems. Those are rules written by other people over which I have no control. So for Ben Shapiro to say, it's outrageous, it's a conspiracy theory to blame the system, does make me suspect maybe you're a beneficiary of a system that you can't actually defend, and so you're attacking me for asking questions about that system. That's just my reaction to what he said.
I mean, it comes across that way for sure. Obviously, I don't know what the motivations of Ben Shapiro really happen to be. What I do know is that when it comes to government handouts, he never really seems to have a problem with the government handouts that get sent abroad to other countries. You get what I'm saying? So there's that. But, you know, the other thing is, even if you're doing well, even if you're affluent, do you really want to live in a country where as soon as you walk outside your door, there's a massive homeless encampment?
Oh, I agree.
You know, do you really want to live in a country like that? Because I don't. Do you want to live in a country where close to 100,000 of your fellow Americans are dying of drug overdoses, and our government seems to not really care much, and in fact exploits that as a talking point to justify a potential war with Venezuela, which has nothing to do with fentanyl, by the way. Sure.
I know.
So
yeah, actually, last question on this, but I just want to clear it up. So, we played that tape of Ben, attacking me because I really like Venezuela's anti-usury laws. Sorry, I do. I don't think you should charge 600% interest annually on a payday loan. I don't think that should be allowed, period. So
agreed.
I guess I'm a socialist. But I think it's predatory and cruel, and it's slavery. So no. But in that litany, he said, Maduro's bad. Okay, I'm sure. He's a dictatorial, seems to be. And he's importing fentanyl into the United States. Not meaningfully true. Probably true in some, but he's not. Venezuela is not the main source of fentanyl in the United States. It's not even close. That's Mexico. So established. That's not true what he said. So what is the motive in regime changing Maduro and toppling the government of Venezuela? What is the motive there? Do you know?
I think there are multiple different motives, including the fact that former Senator Marco Rubio, current Secretary of State, is a Cuban American, has had an axe to grind with Venezuela because of the fact that Venezuela is aligned with Cuba. And look, your sick little personal pet project shouldn't be something that the United States is dragged into and is forced to fund. But the other thing, I think, It's funny. When the Venezuela story started developing, I'm like, oh, yes, finally, like a foreign policy story where we don't have to talk about Israel. But apparently, according to Senator Lindsey Graham, there's some weird connection with Hezbollah, which is that true? I have no idea, but I don't care. I don't care.
Exactly.
Are we going to go to war with every country that allegedly supports a militia or a group of people that are critical of or not in favor of or even at war with Israel? Like, that's crazy.
That does seem to be the criterion. I heard Lindsey Graham say that, and I was reminded that I'm against the 1983 barracks bombing in Beirut. Of course, it killed all those Marines. Apparently that was Hezbollah. I think it's a little more complicated than that, is my very informed impression. However, I'm against that. They did it. I'm mad. But as a practical matter, that was 42 years ago, Hezbollah does not play a meaningful role in the decline of the United States that I have noticed. So, like, if you're really obsessed with Hamas, Hezbollah, and to the exclusion of the issues that actually affect our country, that tells me right there that you're not serving our country, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, yes. And also, listen, if you're worried about terrorist groups that could potentially harm Israel or have harmed Israel, take it up with Netanyahu, who propped up Hamas and facilitated Hamas's funding. I mean, I think that's something that should be considered, and that's never talked about. That's never discussed. So currently, Israel, with the help of the United States, is funding these terrorist militias within Gaza. One of which, Abu Shabab, by the way, is the leader of one of them. I think it's called the Popular Front. He has ties to other terrorist groups like ISIS. So why are we cool with Israel providing arms to that group? That seems like basically setting things up for the future terrorist group that the United States will be goaded into helping Israel fight. It's so obvious if you're paying attention. So, look, to answer your question, if it's not harming U.S. national security, I don't think we should be involved unless, there might be some rare instances where it does make sense to get involved, right? Maybe there's some sort of alliance that we're part of and we want to protect our ally. But I mean, bounds of reason, obviously. With Israel, there are no bounds of reason. There are no limits. And Americans are just expected to shut up and take it. And some of us have decided, no, we're not going to shut up and take it. This is wrong. Our people are suffering, and our priority should be here at home. That was the winning message that Trump campaigned on.
I know.
So put your money where your mouth is, please.
Makes me sad to think about it. Anna Kasparian, clear thinker, a good person, as you proved today, I think. And I really appreciate your spending all this time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tucker.
Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be back next Wednesday.